Why does official history so persistently feed us fairy tales about heroic monks armed with primitive chisels? Prepare for a shock. Today, we are handing a bill to traditional historians, and they won't have the currency to pay it. Using simple mathematics, we will prove that in the 1200s, there was simply no one to build the greatest cathedrals of Europe. There was a physical lack of a population on this planet capable of erecting even a single foundation of such magnitude. Our investigation begins in Rheims. Look at this stone spaceship, Rheims Cathedral. Its facade is adorned with thousands of sculptures, each a jewelry-grade masterpiece. The vaults soar into the stratosphere with a precision that would make modern engineers with laser levels envious. They tell us construction began in 1211 and took only 80 years. 80 years. In a world with no electricity, no trucks, no structural mechanics, and no computer calculations. We are asked to believe that people who had barely learned to cook pottage and lived in thatched huts suddenly, at the snap of a finger, mastered the technologies of the gods. But if you think this is just the talent of our ancestors, we have bad news for your common sense. This isn't talent. It is a mathematical anomaly that turns history textbooks into waste paper. These giants stand across Europe like silent reproaches to our blindness. We look at them and miss the main point: the abyss between what the people of that era were capable of and what stands before our eyes. But Rheims is merely the bait, the first thread in unraveling a global conspiracy. The real nightmare begins when logistics enter the fray. Have you ever tried to transport 1 million tons of stone on a horse-drawn cart? If not, the next section will force you to take a fresh look at the total absence of roads in the Middle Ages. Millions of tons of stone cannot fly, yet official chronicles stubbornly treat us like idiots. Try to find in the historical archives even a single route used by the massive caravans that were supposed to supply the construction of the century around the clock. Spoiler, they don't exist. Building a giant like Rheims Cathedral is, above all, a logistical special operation impossible without a network of railways and heavy trucks. They tell us blocks weighing tens of tons were dragged by horses along muddy trails. But where are the quarries? Show us the scars on the earth where mountains of rock were removed. To process such volumes with perfect precision without machine tools would require an army of tens of thousands of professional carvers who would need to be housed and fed in an era when agriculture barely warded off starvation. The chronicles are deafeningly silent regarding transport arteries and supply chains. We see only the finished result, as if the cathedral simply teleported to its site in one piece. The paradox is so vast it is impossible to ignore. A civilization without elementary technology allegedly created logistics on par with the 21st century. But what if these buildings weren't built, but rather restored? This is hinted at by a strange fiery pattern that we will discuss next. Have you noticed a strange detail? Almost every great cathedral in Europe miraculously rises from the ashes of an old wooden church. Historians feed us this template hundreds of times, hoping we won't recognize it as a pre-packaged falsification. Rheims Cathedral was no exception. The official version states it was founded on the site of a predecessor that burned down just a year before the Great Construction began. This scenario is the perfect eraser for history. Fire allows historians to solve three problems at once: explain the absence of old blueprints, justify the sudden start of a grandiose project, and link an inexplicable masterpiece to a more primitive past. From a mathematical standpoint, such a high number of convenient fires across Europe, immediately followed by a construction boom, looks like a blatant fabrication. Stone giants do not fear fire, but it is precisely these legends of flames that serve as a screen to hide the true origin of these buildings. If the stories of fires are merely a cheap facade, then who was actually behind the blueprints? Upon closer inspection, the identities of the genius architects turn out to be even more ghostly than their burned-down churches. The planet's greatest buildings were constructed by people who have no real biographies, no archives, and not even graves. Official history gives us names, but dig a little deeper, and these great master builders vanish into thin air like morning mist. Take the architect of Rheims Cathedral, a man named Jean. Who was he? Where did he learn to calculate structural loads that baffle engineers even today? Where are his blueprints, calculation tables, or even records of material purchases? They don't exist. Instead of documents, we are served vague legends. Furthermore, historical chronicles attribute participation in projects separated by hundreds of years to these same masters. This creates the image of a mythical character rather than a real human being, a name simply penned into a blank space to settle the matter of authorship. It seems these people were not creators, but mere administrators who discovered ancient ruins and attempted to claim them for their own era. Ghost architects are just one crack in the foundation of lies. The real crushing blow will be dealt by mathematics. Now, we will set the fairy tales aside and pick up a calculator to prove that, in the past, there simply weren't enough people for such achievements. Numbers know no mercy and cannot flatter kings. Now, we will set aside the dusty manuscripts and pick up an impartial tool, the calculator. Mathematics officially delivers a verdict on historical chronicles. There were dozens of times fewer people in the past than we are led to believe. The methodology of our investigation is lethally simple. We take the documented population growth rates of the last 200 years, a period when statistics were recorded honestly. Look at England, a jump from 9 to 65 million people. Spain added 20 million in just half a century. Now let's apply this same mathematical model and begin the countdown. We are using their own logic and their own graphs to verify their own version of history. As soon as we start winding back time, the official demographic picture crumbles to dust. We discover that just a couple of centuries ago, the world was practically empty. These are not just numbers. This is a demographic bomb that voids our ancestors' right to the construction of stone giants. Prepare to dive into the digital abyss. In the next section, we will show specific dates, and you will see how the planet's population melts like snow in hell, leaving historians alone with their absurd fantasies. We are used to thinking of the 19th century as an era of great empires and densely populated cities. But the mathematical filter strips the gilding from this illusion. Just over 100 years ago, there physically could not have been even 1 billion people living on the planet. Let's ground the numbers. If we rewind time just 100 years from today, back to the beginning of the 20th century, the billions we are accustomed to evaporate. Applying the recorded population growth rate to the year 1886, we get a shocking figure, about 928 million people. For the entire planet, to help you understand the scale of this discrepancy, that is less than the population of modern China, spread thinly across all continents. With such a low population density, how could anyone wage colonial wars on 3 continents simultaneously, build trans-Siberian railways, and erect megacities? Official history paints a picture of overcrowded cities, but cold arithmetic asserts the world was practically empty. But 1886 was still a densely populated era. The real demographic nosedive begins when we cross the threshold into the 18th century. There, the numbers become so minuscule that the very existence of states is called into question. We are shown paintings of naval battles and flotillas conquering the oceans. But mathematics turns these canvases into surrealism. In 1610, according to official growth rates, fewer people lived on the entire planet Earth than currently live in the city of Moscow alone. As we move deeper into history, we cross a critical line. By 1748, only 106 million people remain on Earth, the population of modern-day Japan, distributed across all continents. But the true collapse of logic occurs in 1610. The mathematical model, based on the data provided by historians themselves, yields a figure of 11.8 million people. Think about it. This is the era of the great geographical discoveries, a time of building colossal empires and endless wars. Who manned these fleets? Who settled America, India, and Australia? Who stood in the endless ranks of the armies? If each continent only accounted for a couple of million people, any war would have turned entire countries into desolate deserts within a week. Yet even this demographic deficit will seem like overpopulation once we reach the founding dates of the great cathedrals. Prepare for the final knockout. In the 1200s, the planet was officially empty. Hold on to your seats. We have reached the moment of truth. Mathematics deals the final blow to official history, one from which it is impossible to recover. In the year 1200, when grandiose construction was allegedly booming across Europe, fewer people lived on the entire planet Earth than attend a single football match today. Applying the same relentless formula to the era of the founding of Rheims Cathedral, we arrive at a figure that sounds like the delusions of a madman: 18,700 people. I repeat, that is not the population of a city, that is the population of the entire globe. 18,000 people, scattered from the icy tundra to the Amazon jungles. And at this very same time, if you believe the textbooks, thousands of enthusiasts are simultaneously erecting hundreds of Gothic masterpieces, quarrying millions of tons of stone, and leading crusades. Who built all of this? Who fed the workers? Who designed the vaults? Mathematics gives a clear answer. It is physically impossible. The official version of history shatters against elementary arithmetic. In the 1200s, the planet simply lacked the biological resource for such activity. But if there were no people whose shadows are frozen in stone, if the humanity of that time physically could not have raised these walls, then the answer must be sought not in progress, but in ruins. In the next section, we will show proof that we are merely tenants in someone else's much more majestic world. The first cameras do not lie. They captured not a triumph of construction, but the pathetic attempts of survivors to inhabit someone else's mud-covered megaliths. Look closely at the old photographs. They depict a world that is not being built, but is slowly thawing after a global catastrophe. Ancient daguerreotypes from the mid-19th century are a true nightmare for any historian. In them, we see ancient temples and Gothic cathedrals, but they look like elderly giants among infants. The buildings are often half submerged in layers of soil, their first floors converted into basements, surrounded by primitive life. People in rags, horse-drawn carts, and crooked wooden fences stand against a backdrop of perfect stonework that we cannot reproduce today. This is not a chronicle of creation, it is a chronicle of the reclamation of ruins. We are seeing a parasite civilization that found the legacy of giants and is trying to adapt it to its needs, calling it its own history. The technological gap between those walking the streets and those who designed them is visible to the naked eye. But if these buildings are the legacy of a unified past, they must share a common handwriting. And they do. Across the globe, from Europe to Asia, the same symbols are scattered, proving that the world was once a single entity. Official history tries to convince us that different peoples lived in isolation, but the architectural code says otherwise. The same symbol, the griffin, graces buildings in Paris, Athens, and St. Petersburg, as if applied according to a single state standard. The griffin is not just a mythical creature from fairy tales, it is the signature of builders whose cultural code was erased from memory. Look at the old photos. Ancient structures separated by thousands of kilometers are executed in an identical style and decorated with the same basements. This would be impossible for fragmented tribes who supposedly had no connection. Before us are the traces of a unified global civilization that possessed technologies we can barely comprehend today. These buildings are not the fruit of the imagination of self-taught monks, but parts of a vast global system. We are told about a primitive Middle Ages so that we won't ask questions about how the same architectural school managed to design cities across the planet in a unified key. Symbols and photographs merely confirm what mathematics is screaming. But if we follow our calculations to the end, we run into a terrifying date. In the next section, we will reveal the point where human history is completely reset. We have taken this mathematical experiment to its logical conclusion, and reality has shuddered. If we believe the figures upon which all modern history is built, then in the mid-7th century, the entire planet Earth should have been inhabited by only 3 people. You heard that correctly. 3. Continuing our countdown, we fly through centuries where humanity melts away before our eyes. Past the year 1200 mark, the population trends toward a statistical margin of error. The mathematical verdict is merciless. In the 600s AD, the planet's population hits 0. This is not just a number, it is a wall that official chronology slams into. We are left with 2 choices. Either admit that before the 7th century, history did not exist, and the pyramids and Rome are hallucinations, or understand the main point. Our mathematical model breaks because it hits an event horizon. This calculation proves that human history was not a smooth progression. Very recently, there was a global rupture, a catastrophe of such scale that it erased billions of people and reset civilization, forcing the survivors to begin demographic growth practically from scratch. This mathematical zero is the key to understanding the Great Reset. We are not the descendants of primitive savages, we are the children of those who survived the end of the world. The final word of our investigation will settle the score on this global fraud once and for all. Now you see the whole picture. We live in a world of stage sets built upon the ruins of a civilization of gods. Mathematics has destroyed the alibi of official history, leaving us face to face with a terrifying yet majestic truth. The Great Reset is the only key that opens every lock. Now it is clear why incredible cathedrals and castles have no blueprints. They are not structures of the Dark Ages, but the surviving legacy of a pre-catastrophic world that was claimed later. Technologies were not lost over centuries. They vanished along with their creators in the flames of a cataclysm that occurred very recently, likely around the 18th century. The explosive population growth in the 19th and 20th centuries is not a continuation of an ancient lineage, but a desperate attempt by a handful of survivors to restore humanity from nearly a zero point. The entire official chronicle drummed into our heads since school was written after the catastrophe to legitimize a new world order and hide the fact that we are merely tenants in someone else's magnificent house. The cathedrals stand as silent evidence, proving that our history is shorter, more tragic, and more mysterious than commonly believed. We have only just begun to lance this boil of lies. If you are ready to learn what other secrets are hidden by the dust of ages, subscribe. Ahead lies an investigation that will finally turn your world upside down.